Chefs often say, if you feed the eyes, you feed the stomach. And so we've taken them at their word this season in the studio garden with our edible landscape. We decided to go with something that would be a nice design representative of European gardens. And it just so happens that in Kitchen Garden Magazine's February-March issue, we found an article that does just that. Jan Gertley is a graphic designer in Washington State, and she specializes in designing edible landscapes. And she wrote an article about how to outline your vegetable garden to where it looks like a European garden. And we've chosen a design that starts out with cool season crops such as purple cabbage, lettuce, and so forth, and then it's outlined with ornamental plants, and in this case purple alyssum, and over here with the lettuce it's outlined in white alyssum. Well, the basic design choices that we had from this article were two things. There was a quilt pattern and a central star pattern. And we opted for the central star pattern because it allows for good traffic flow through our gardens. Now this garden design is laid out for a garden that's 16 feet wide by 18 feet long. And our beds are 24 feet wide and 48 feet long, so we needed to stretch our design. And Ms. Gertley gave us permission to do this and put it on our studio garden and have it on the show this season. And you can do this in your own backyard by taking a basic rectangle and start playing with some geometric patterns. Just get some graph paper and look for a basic grid design and pick a dimension for each grid. Now we chose our unit of measure to be 1 square equals 1 foot. So we just counted down 24 squares this way and 48 squares across this way, and that outlined our basic bed. And then we started counting over and outlining the bed, and we'll have 4 corners that will be filled with cool season crops right now, and the entire bed will be outlined with a 2 foot wide strip of basil. Now that's a lot more than you'd need in your average garden, so adjust your plant choices accordingly. But we wanted something that would have a lot of good color impact out in our studio garden. And if you look behind me now, we've taken the design from paper and put it in our soil in place here. Now to stake all of this out, it took 4 people about an hour and a half's time. So invite your friends over, get a 100-foot tape measure, and start off by first establishing your 4 corner posts. We have 4 stakes, 1 at each corner, and then we stretched 2 strings diagonally across the rectangle to establish our center. And then from there we just started putting out lengths of 100-foot tape and measuring off of our grid design onto the soil and putting out stakes. And it took a little while, but it was so rewarding to see the whole design start to come to life here in the soil. We prepared our soil well ahead of time using a lot of organic matter. We worked in composted manure and so forth, and so it's a nice rich soil ready for planting. Our pathways will be covered with a mulch, and we think it's going to be a great design. In fact, I have a few plants to put in right now that I'll be able to show you. The first plants we'll be putting in our edible landscape this spring is purple cabbage. And to form the center of our central star pattern, we're going to have 4 purple cabbage back here, 4 up at the front, and then 16 broccoli here and 16 behind me. And believe me, we have plenty of volunteers out here willing to eat all that broccoli, so we'll have no problem disposing of it. Now to measure accurately so that your plants look like they're in an even grid design, again take your tape measure and just measure across from stake to stake so that it comes out nice and even. And if you take care with that, you end up with a very nice symmetric pattern. Now we grew these purple cabbage in 3-inch pots, so we'd make sure that we have a nice big plant to set out. And you want to be careful that you don't put out things too early that are going to be harmed by frost. But we wanted to have something fairly large in the garden. Some other things that you can be putting in right now would be the broccoli, also alyssum for your borders. And the alyssum is not edible. I want to emphasize that. It's strictly for an ornamental outline. However, later in the season, we're going to use German chamomile around our beds when it gets a little bit warmer, and that will be edible, and we'll be able to harvest that for chamomile tea. Some other plants that you can put in right now that I think will be very attractive would be red Swiss chard, and also different leaf lettuces. The red and the green leaf lettuces, those could be planted in a contrasting pattern. You could also do potatoes, green beans, any kind of plant that stays fairly tidy. This type of design doesn't really lend itself very well to vine crops, but later in the season, when these cool season crops have done their job and ready to take them out, we'll be replacing them with different varieties of bell and hot peppers, and also some determinate tomatoes that will stay fairly neat in the garden. And I think we're going to end up with a season long of a nice graphic design out here that will be enjoyable for people to look at all through the season. And now let me show you another themed garden that we're just now getting planted for spring. One of our theme gardens for this year out in the studio garden is a children's playground garden. And in the corner of it, we want to have a corn patch because kids love to grow sweet corn. They love to eat it, they like the big plants, and it just adds an air of fun to the garden. Now, if you have a very small backyard, you may be thinking, oh, I don't have room for sweet corn. There's no way we can do this. Well, you can. We've just taken 4 landscape timbers, they're 8 feet long each, and made an 8 by 8 square. And in this square is enough space to grow 25 plants. The way we've set it up is down the length of our square, running north-south, we have our rows marked out 1.5 feet apart. And so every 16 inches we have a row. We'll have 5 rows of corn here, and we'll end up with 5 plants in each row. And if the raccoons will behave themselves this summer, hopefully, if we get 2 ears of corn off each plant, that should be 50 ears of sweet corn. So that's pretty simple math to do to figure out a place in your garden. Now, to have success with sweet corn, though, you want to make sure that you prepare the soil well ahead of time. I have my rows already marked off, but before we did that, we added about 2 pounds of blood meal. Now, blood meal is about 10% total nitrogen, and that's going to give us a long season supply of nitrogen in the garden. So we weighed out 2 pounds worth, spread it out, and worked it in. We also worked in 2 to 3 inches of organic matter, and this was some very well composted horse manure and straw that was very well decomposed. So the soil is nice and rich and ready for the corn to go in. Now, the variety that we're using is candy corn, and candy corn is just a standard hybrid sweet corn variety. It's very delicious, and we thought a name like that would be very appealing to children. One problem, though, is that the seed that we purchased has been treated. And this is coated seed. Normally corn seed, of course, is a nice buttery yellow or white. This has been coated with Captan fungicide and methoxychlor insecticide, and that's to guard against soil pests and soil fungi to keep the seed from being prevented from germinating. But if you have children who are planting this, try to buy untreated seed. Or if you have seed that has a color coating, and it may be red or green or blue, make sure that you have them wear some disposable rubber gloves. Now, usually, if you're helping kids plant sweet corn, let them plant pretty generously, allowing for crows and blue jays to pick them out, and also allowing for any cool temperatures. Now, we're planting about 15 seeds in each row, and then we'll come back in 10 days after germination. 10 days after the seed is up, the plants are growing. We'll thin this down to just 5 plants in the row. And as I mentioned, that'll give us 25 plants. So I'm going to go ahead and cover this over. We'll get the rest of it planted, and then we'll give you one more tip for ensuring success this early in the spring. Once you get all the seed planted, if your soil is as dry as ours, you want to make sure that you water it in real well, because seed has to have moisture to germinate, and otherwise it will just sit there. Also, you might check your soil temperature before planting. It helps with corn if the temperature is between 60 to 65 degrees before planting. just tamp that down and water it in. And then one final tip, as the corn comes up, we could still have some frosty weather. And so you might want to take some spun bonded polyester row cover. This is the same thing as fabric interfacing that you find at fabric stores. And stretch that over the row. We're just going to do 3 rows with it and 2 without. And we'll just tuck this in under here. And what that will do for us, once we get it all secured, is it will allow in air and light and moisture, but it will guard the young plants against frost, or protect them against frost when they first come up, so they can get off to a good start. And it actually warms the soil a little bit before the we get out of our frost season. The trick with remay is to remember to take it off in time, because once those plants start coming up, they'll start pushing up on this quite a bit, so you don't want to have it too taut on there, but that should help you. One final tip is use a biological marker in your area of Oklahoma to tell you that it is time to plant sweet corn. And we were always told growing up that when oak leaves are the size of squirrel's ears, then it's time to plant corn. So hopefully it's that time in your backyard and you can get started with it.
We hope you enjoyed this video. It's part of our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel. You can also find more recent videos on our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. And join us on social media for great gardening tips, photos, and discussion.